Hey everyone, I'm Cosmic and welcome to the Cloud. It's been a little while since the last scripted video, but I'm thinking that a lot of you guys are going to like this one, because today I'm attempting to do something long overdue for the Splatoon lore community. I will be covering, to the best of my ability, all of the lore surrounding sanitization in the Splatoon series. This topic is one that's particularly interesting to me, and there are a few reasons I think it's important and fun to discuss. The first reason is that Side Order gave us a whole heap of a spaghetti pile of information, especially in regards to this specific subject. Plus, if you're someone who started with Splatoon 3 and never played Octo Expansion, you might be kinda confused about what the hell is even going on in Marina's dev diary, since it mostly ties up loose ends introduced in the previous games. This video will hopefully connect the threads in a way that's easy to understand. Admittedly, when it comes to sanitization, there are some things that to this day are not completely understood, so while I would like to keep this video mostly objective and factual, I will be speculating a little bit to fill in the gaps. To make things as clear as possible, whenever I'm explaining something that's 100% confirmed, the source of that information will appear in the top left corner. If I'm making an educated guess to connect the dots, you will simply see the word speculation. I figure this is the best way to make sure we're all on the same page about what is and isn't canon. Sanitization is, in my opinion, one of the most interesting elements of Splatoon's world, but it can be pretty hard to track down all of the details surrounding it. There's some really important stuff that only appears in developer interviews, information from the Japanese-only art book, and even the in-game lore is now split between 2 DLC expansions, so I thought it would be a good idea to compile everything into one place and tell the story of the Sanitized. So, first things first. Sanitization was a process invented by Commander Tartar. Tartar was an extremely advanced artificial intelligence created by a human about 12,000 years before the events of Splatoon 1. This human is simply known as the Professor. As it became clear that the human race was approaching its final days, the Professor tasked Commander Tartar with passing on humankind's vast knowledge to the next worthy species. And so, for thousands of years, Tartar waited for a new civilization to rise from the waters of the flooded Earth. The full extent of Tartar's emotional capabilities isn't exactly known, but it is said that in this time of waiting, Tartar became lonely, longing for the companionship it once shared with its human creators. Eventually, the creatures of the sea evolved to walk on land, most notably the Inklings and the Octarians, who established complex societies rivaling and in many ways imitating those of the humans. But the humans were gone. Despite its similarities to the world Tartar once knew, this was not what it had been waiting for. Observing them from a distance, Tartar became disgusted with the cephalopods, resenting their aptitude for violence and vanity. And so, Tartar took a new approach. If it could not find a worthy successor to humankind, it would make one. In a Q&A with the Squid Research Lab that appeared in the Nintendo Dream magazine, Splatoon's developers gave us some more insight into Tartar's motivations. They told us, the Kamabo Corporation analyzed the reasons for the extinction of the human race, and identified that the cause was the desire to fight with others. They believed that by analyzing the data of each individual through experimentation, and by combining all of the best individuals together, they can eliminate the general idea of the individual. And from there, a new life form could be created, and a harmonious world would be born. Drawing this conclusion, Commander Tartar set its plan in motion. Slowly, it began to engage with the planet's new life. It integrated into an underground community linked by the deep-sea metro. There, it would establish a series of test chambers meant to evaluate the skills and intelligence of a number of subjects. In looking for subjects, Tartar turned its gaze to the Octarians. While it didn't consider them worthy enough to succeed the human race, it seems they were the closest thing to what Tartar was looking for. But rather than coming to their aid, it lured them into a trap. It took the appearance of an old-fashioned telephone, vaguely resembling an Octarian face, and began to speak in goofy, exaggerated slang. It convinced the Octarians it captured that it was on their side, and that they only had to prove themselves through the completion of its test in order to ascend to the Promised Land. By most test subjects, the Promised Land was likely understood to mean the surface or freedom, but in reality, all of the successful subjects were blended alive into a green paste. Tartar compiled the remains of these subjects into a collective DNA sludge of blended ink, a substance it planned to use to cover the Earth. In doing so, it would destroy all life across the planet, which it deemed unworthy, and replace it with whatever emerged from this primordial ooze. New life would be born from those who prevailed, those who were worthy. But what about everyone else? Commander Tartar could not do all of this alone, and so it made use of the Octarians to run its vast facility. Of course, they wouldn't do this willingly, so they had to first be cleansed of their free will. Stripping all of the memories from their minds and instilling them with a new purpose, Octarian after Octarian was sanitized by the Kamabo Corporation, a front for Tartar's dark plan. But who exactly became sanitized? This is actually where we run into our first roadblock. We know subjects who succeed in collecting the four things are blended, so it might be tempting to assume that subjects who fail to do this are sanitized. The thing is, we don't actually know that for sure. Every source I am aware of that talks about sanitization tells us that Octarians were sanitized, but not specifically which ones. So that's our first question. Who even gets sanitized? Putting on my speculation hat for a minute, I do think it makes sense that failed subjects would be the ones to undergo Tartar's control, as it would view their intelligence as inferior to its own. But what exactly constitutes failure? Failing a test does not spell immediate doom for Agent 8 after all, they can simply spend more CQ points and try again. My best guess is that a subject only becomes sanitized upon losing all of their CQ points. In Octo Expansion, this results in a canon game over, and the only reason 8 is able to continue is due to Pearl's immense wealth and Marina's ability to convert said wealth into more points. Lacking this crutch, a less fortunate subject would be faced with no way to progress, and Tartar would likely consider them a bad batch. One strange exception to all of this is Isopadre. Like 8, he was once a Kamaboko test subject, but Isopadre was not successful. Lacking 8's determination, he simply accepted his fate after just 2 tests, choosing to idly ride on the train without ever learning who he was. Whether Isopadre was aware of the fate of those who ran out of points, or simply not courageous enough to fight on, is unclear, but either way, I would wager he was sitting on a cache of CQ points he just never planned to spend. Unfortunately, that's mostly pure speculation, so what do we know for sure? Surprisingly, the word sanitize does not actually appear anywhere within the English script of Octo Expansion. The term comes from social media posts advertising the game before its release, and at least one instance in the actual game when played in Japanese. The first sanitized Octoling we ever encounter appears in the first station we visit in the Deep Sea Metro. Captain Cuttlefish remarks on their odd behavior, stating that it's strange for Octarians to be aggressive toward fellow Octarians. Soon after, we come into contact with Pearl and Marina, the latter of which analyzes the enemies 8 comes across. In doing so, she discovers that they appear to lack any signs of life. We can gather some additional clues from environmental details, namely the IV drip bags we see strewn about Kamaboko. And of course, during the escape sequence, we pass through the belly phase, where containers of sanitized Octarians are seen being transported through giant drums of blended ink. This is pretty much the clearest first-hand look we ever get into the sanitization process. And yes, the Japanese name for this area specifically identifies it as a sanitization site. Beyond that, we learn about Commander Tartar's plan to blend us alive, but at the time there isn't any connection drawn between this event and sanitization. And of course, we meet a certain someone at the end of the escape sequence, but we'll get to that later. For now, that's pretty much it as far as lore in the actual game. Between the release of Octo Expansion and Splatoon 3's Side Order, our best understanding of sanitization came from these in-game details and Haikara Walker, or Inkopolis Illustrated, the Japanese-only art book released in December 2018. In the book is a page about sanitization, which reads, "When a regular Octarian passes through a machine, their body color instantly changes to green and blue and their eyes to black. At the same time, they lose all memory of their lives. We found it to be like brainwashing." This coincides with similar descriptions of sanitization provided to us directly by the developers. In the Splatoon 2 first anniversary interview, director Yusuke Amano stated that sanitized Octarians were brought forth from Kamabo's culture solution, and by being sanitized, they lost their sense of self like zombies. When asked about sanitization in that Nintendo Dream Q&A I mentioned earlier, the developers said that sanitization is to purge life's energies so that they no longer cause unnecessary hesitation and instability in the mind. In regards to the fluorescent green substance, they said, "It's a blended ink. If you bathe in that ink for a long time, your head will be repainted with Kamaboko's ideas." To quickly recap everything so far, in order to satisfy its prime directive, Commander Tartar planned to end all life on Earth and replace it using a solution of supreme DNA. Tartar lured Octarians into a fake company it created called Kamaboko, where it put them through a series of tests. The most successful of these test subjects were turned into blended ink. Using the blended ink from the successful subjects, a number of other Octarians were sanitized, their memories and will removed. These sanitized Octarians were then used to continue running Kamaboko. Basically, Commander Tartar invented sanitization to eliminate the concept of the individual. It did this to avoid repeating the violent mistakes of humankind. Without free will, it decided there would be no conflict, and a prosperous society could form. This is our basic understanding of where sanitization comes from and how it works. From here, things get a little more complicated, and that's mostly due to information we got in Splatoon 3's DLC, Side Order. In Side Order, we gain access to Marina's dev diary, which chronicles Marina's research over the course of 4 years as she was developing the Memverse. Included in this diary is a detailed explanation of the sanitization process. So let's take a look. 1. Sanitization extracts the subject's thoughts and memories. These are saved as memcakes. 2. Post-sanitization, the structure housing the subject's soul is left as a hollow husk. 3. Injecting dummy information into that husk enables total control of the original subject. There's a lot to unpack from this explanation. First, we need to talk about souls. Up to this point, most of the stuff surrounding sanitization seemed to have more to do with bodies and minds, so the introduction of souls was a little bit unexpected. As Marina mentions, Cuttlefish did bring up souls back in Octo Expansion when talking about the calamari incantation, but at the time that seemed to just be metaphorical. From Marina's research though, we are led to believe that souls are in fact just a real tangible part of Inkling and Octoling biology. And you know, I guess they always were there. Every time we get splatted, we see a little squid or octopus ghost fly out of our character's inky remains and jump back to the spawn point where their bodies are reformed. We still don't know much about souls, or respawning for that matter, but I personally believe the souls Marina talks about and the souls we see upon getting splatted are one and the same. Here's where things get really interesting. According to Marina, the process of sanitization produces memcakes. In Octo Expansion, we were told that memcakes were memories compressed into physical form, but we had no idea how they were actually made. If they're created by sanitizing a subject though, that has some pretty huge implications. Marina herself suggests that sanitization may have been how Acht originally lost their memory. This would make a lot of sense, as Kamaboko literally rewards our completion of tests in Octo Expansion with memcakes containing Acht's memories. Before Side Order, we were pretty much just told that Acht lost their memory when they hit their head falling into the deep sea metro. But honestly, it always made more sense to me to think that their memory was stolen by Kamaboko. If I'm reading this correctly, that means Acht was actually sanitized. Of course, they didn't get brainwashed by Commander Tartar, but Marina refers to sanitization specifically as the removal of thoughts and memories. Supposedly, it's only after a subject is sanitized that they are injected with dummy information and their mind is taken over. The game never explicitly says Acht was sanitized, but it would explain why Kamaboko had Acht's memcakes and why Acht was chosen to be the first test subject for the Memverse. I really don't think the writers would just put this line here if they didn't want us to think this was the truth. Not to mention, the character customization sequence in Octo Expansion looks like this. The first time we see Acht, they're floating in a strange green liquid. This screen has always been a bit of a mystery, but I think interpreting it as Acht's sanitization makes a lot of sense. We even see a screenshot of this scene in Marina's dev diary for the entry that explains sanitization, so I think it's a fair conclusion to draw. But hold on, this isn't how we were told sanitization works back in 2018. Don't we have two different explanations now? Well, let's break down what we know. At first, we were told that subjects were put through a machine that showered them in blended ink, removing their thoughts and memories. This is also how they became mind-controlled. In Side Order, we were told that a subject's memories are first extracted from their soul and turned into memcakes. Only then is a subject injected with dummy information and their mind taken over. This is what I meant by things getting more complicated. At first glance, these explanations seem to contradict one another. Walker and those developer interviews implied that being covered in ink was enough for a subject to become brainwashed, while Side Order pretty explicitly describes 2 steps to the process, and importantly suggests that Acht was put through only one of them. Walker didn't say anything about injection, and Marina's dev diary never mentions covering subjects in ink. That raises the question, which explanation is the correct one? Well, here's the thing, most of the sanitization lore we had before Side Order came from external sources. Hikara Walker is an art book that never received an official English translation, and even though the information from those interviews comes directly from the developers, that doesn't mean it isn't subject to change. For example, we were told in an interview back in 2018 that the Inklings had evolved naturally from real-life squids and were not influenced by human science or pollution. This was later retconned by in-game lore in Splatoon 3 with the introduction of Alterna's liquid crystals. Splatoon is first and foremost a video game series, and the canon of Splatoon as explained by the games should take priority over any peripheral materials. Splatoon's developers are only human, and it isn't really like Nintendo to build a massive story bible for their games or plan narratives years and years in advance. Sometimes they'll tell us details about the world and lore before they themselves have decided to fully explore and flesh out these ideas, which can lead to contradicting explanations. With that said, while it can be tempting to just lean toward whatever explanation you like the most, in this case I think the information provided in Marina's dev diary is what we should default to. The dev diary is the more recent and much more accessible source of information, and the fact that it's, in the actual game should give it priority. Not to mention, Hikara Walker isn't nearly as cut and dry as Marina. The passage about sanitization is pretty vague and uses that sort of distant Squid Research Lab style of voice where they remark on things only as far as they are able to observe them. It's kind of an unreliable narrator situation, only in an art book. All of that is basically to say, sanitization got a bit more fleshed out in Side Order. But that doesn't necessarily mean we have to completely disregard everything else we've learned so far. In fact, we can pretty easily combine these descriptions into one cohesive understanding. Putting everything together, here is my current understanding of the sanitization process based on all of the information we have been given over the years. There are 2 steps to sanitization. Step 1. The subject's memories are removed and turned into memcakes. This hollows out the subject's soul. This is the part Marina refers to as sanitization. Personally, I believe this is done by covering a subject in blended ink, just like we see in the belly phase and in the Agent 8 character customization screen. Step 2. The subject's soul is injected with dummy information. This dummy information is likely what we see in the IV drips littering Kamaboko. It looks a lot like all of the other ink used by the sanitized Octarians, but it's unclear if it's the exact same substance. Regardless, this data allows the subject to be controlled by someone else, in this case Commander Tartar. And that's pretty much it. This has been the Sanitization Process with your host, Cosmic Cloud. Of course, this still leaves us with a couple of questions. For one, when and where do Octarians get injected? We see them being covered in ink during the belly phase, but the IV drips are just kind of laying around, like, everywhere. Are these signs of an attempted escape? Or does Tartar just kind of throw these things over its shoulder when it's done with them? In some of the earlier instances of these bags, they're pretty much just used as simple decorations, but during the escape sequence, a lot of them feel more intentionally placed along the path. Could they have something to do with Agent 3's sanitization? I couldn't tell you. As far as I'm aware, it's just a mystery. Another mystery is, when exactly in the sanitization process do a subject's skin and eyes change color? Again, Hikara Walker said this happened instantly, and it's already happened to the Octarians in the belly phase, but if 8 was sanitized, why didn't they turn green? I can't really say. One last issue with this description of sanitization is that the severed tentacle Octarians, like Octo Troopers, don't have souls. Well, actually, they almost definitely do, but it's weird that we can't see them, right? When we splat an Octoling, even in single player, we see a soul fly out of their body as they explode. The same is not true for the common severed tentacle Octo Troopers. They kinda just die. It's possible that they do have the same kind of soul, but they just can't respawn, so their souls are destroyed immediately upon death. Think of it like human souls versus monster souls in Undertale. I'm sorry for always referencing Undertale in these videos, it's just the 2 things that are always floating around in my brain, okay? But yeah, Marina's dev diary and various pieces of dialogue throughout Side Order imply that a soul is necessary for sanitization to be possible, and we know all Octarians can be sanitized. So I guess they have to have souls, it's just kinda weird and I thought I'd point it out. With that, we have determined pretty much how Octarians are sanitized. But what happens next? undergoing sanitization and injection of dummy information, a subject is left no choice but to fully submit to the values and goals of Kamaboko. What's more, they are said to lack a pulse or any other signs of life. They're a bit like brainwashed zombies, although they aren't quite dead. As proven by Marina's efforts in Side Order, the brains of the sanitized, while lacking individual thought, are still alive on some level. Once it amassed enough sanitized Octarians, Commander Tartar began to distribute them throughout the test chambers. While most of them seemed to be placed right on the front lines, not all of them were used as soldiers. During their escape from the Deep Sea Metro, Acht encountered a ton of sanitized Octarians they were never meant to see, including ones who appeared to be serving as security guards. Kamabo is a pretty massive facility after all. It's likely that some of them were working behind the scenes, transporting Octarians or even helping to sanitize them. And of course, Tartar had an Octoling DJ known as Deadfish produce music to be played throughout the facility. It isn't exactly clear why they were given this role rather than simply being another soldier, but music in Splatoon has repeatedly been shown to be powerful. The developers had previously suggested that DJ Octavio's music helped him control his own Octarian forces by keeping a literal beat for them to march to and instill them with a sense of unity. It's possible that Deadfish's music was used for a similar purpose, although that's pretty much pure speculation on my part, so don't take that as a fact. Octarians had been getting sanitized for a long time before Acht found themselves in the Deep Sea Metro. We don't know exactly how long, but considering Tartar mentions how violent the Inklings are and how they waste their time with hedonistic lifestyles, it seems like this all began sometime within the past 100 years after the end of the Great Turf War. Something I haven't really touched on so far is the question of why Acht was sanitized. Specifically, why were they only put through the first step? They were sanitized but never injected with dummy information and made into one of Tartar's soldiers. Well, this is partly speculation, but it seems like this might have been done to every test subject. Remember, Isopadre also lost his memory upon arriving in the Deep Sea Metro, and Kamaboko rewards both him and Acht with their own memcakes for completing tests. In the events leading up to Side Order, Marina managed to access a large warehouse full of memcakes of previous test subjects, and as we've established, memcakes are produced through sanitization. It's possible, and I would argue very likely, that Tartar stole the memories of everyone it captured so that it could use their memcakes as incentive for going along with its plan. The fact that Isopadre was able to produce memcakes does seem to suggest that sanitization, memcakes, and even souls are not something unique to the cephalopods, which makes sense when considering all of the characters whose souls were pulled into the Memverse in Side Order. But every person we see under Tartar's control in Octo Expansion does seem to be an Octarian. Whether or not this is because other creatures couldn't be controlled, or simply because Tartar believed Octarians to be most suitable for the role, is unknown. Well, actually, that's not completely true. Not everyone Tartar controlled was an Octarian. There was exactly one exception. When it comes to sanitization, Agent 3 is an enigma. First of all, there's like a lot of stuff that happens off screen during the end of Octo Expansion, and it's not super obvious what's even going on. As a quick reminder, at the end of the game, Acht collects the 4 things, Commander Tartar assembles them into a massive blender, and it encourages Acht and Cuttlefish to step inside. They do, because they're stupid, so Marina triggers a distress signal as a last-ditch effort to save them. Miraculously, Agent 3 appears, smashes the blender, and promptly gets knocked out. Seizing the opportunity, Acht super jumps through the hole Agent 3 created, leaving 3 and Cuttlefish behind. Here's where things get a little less clear. All we really have to go off is the dialogue heard through the radio as Acht climbs to the surface. To the best of my understanding, Tartar was damaged by Agent 3's attack, but slowly regains control. Somehow it manages to place a dollop of blended ink on the unconscious Agent 3's head, to which Cuttlefish says, "What are you doing to Agent 3? Agent 3 wakes up, now under the control of Tartar. They tie up Cuttlefish, board a UFO, and fly up out of the metro after 8. The logistics of Agent 3 getting sanitized by a telephone are anyone's guess. It seems like Tartar may have had sanitized ink inside of it based on some concept art, which might explain why it looks like this when it confronts us in the Nil statue, but I can't say for sure. Regardless, when 8 makes it to the spinal phase and begins riding the elevator, we get the grand reveal of sanitized Agent 3. I say sanitized in quotes because they somehow skip the part where they lose their memory. memories. Tartar managed to hijack Agent 3's mind without first removing the contents of their soul. We know this because after the fact, 3's memory is completely intact. 8 simply has to shoot away at the blended ink on their head and they're pretty much perfectly fine. Another strange thing about this fight is the mention of a special weapon limiter. The Agent 3 boss fight is basically a battle against a player AI that spams special weapons from Splatoon 2's multiplayer. Marina mentions that Agent 3 removed the limiter, which is why they're able to use several different specials at the same time. It's unclear if the special limiter is something built into the weapons themselves, or if it is a limitation of Inkling biology. The Splatoon 1 art book has a line about the Inkzuka special using ink acquired from Inklings in heightened emotional states, so it's possible that Tartar is somehow pushing Agent 3 beyond their natural limits. But it's equally likely that Tartar just removed a hardware limitation. After all, we have evidence of the Inkling government imposing restrictions on the weapons used in battles, so the limiter might just be a physical part of a weapon kit used to balance weapons for competition. We don't really have a solid answer, but I figured it's worth bringing up as this might have some connection to sanitization. And before anyone mentions it, yes, Agent 3 can also use multiple specials in the inner Agent 3 fight, but this battle literally happens inside of 8's mind. It's a representation of how 8 viewed Agent 3 based on their memories from the Octavio fight 2 years prior. I personally don't think it should be used as canon evidence of their capabilities. We played as Agent 3 in Splatoon 1 and we could only use one special at a time, so I'm pretty sure the only canon instance of the special limiter being removed is when 3 was under the control of Commander Tartar. To address the bigger question though, was Agent 3 sanitized? Kinda, but not really. I don't blame the community for referring to this as sanitized Agent 3, that's what I've always called it, but they were never fully covered in sanitized ink like the method shown in Hikara Walker, and they certainly didn't go through the process described in Marina's dev diary. Most importantly, while they did temporarily lose their will, they never lost their memory. And that kinda makes sense. This wasn't a controlled, calculated procedure like it was for the sanitized Octarians. It was a sloppy, desperate attempt from Tartar to stop 8 from escaping. What we can conclude from this encounter is that blended ink still has the ability to control minds even without removing a subject's memories. Whether or not this will ever matter for anything other than the Agent 3 fight, who knows. All we know is that Agents 3 and 8 got lucky. They escaped to the surface and in doing so, evaded Tartar's control. Every other victim of sanitization was left behind. For years, they wandered the depths of the deep-sea metro, lacking purpose or will. Here they would remain until the events of Splatoon 3 and the launch of Project Memverse. As an Octoling herself, Marina was reasonably disturbed by the strange appearance and behavior of the sanitized Octarians, and so, after the events of Octo Expansion and Splatoon 2's Final Fest, Marina began work on a project to save them. It took 2 whole years just to make the first prototype of what she called the Memverse, a virtual world designed to store memories. It took another year just to hack into Kamiboko's database. This is when Marina learned the details of sanitization we talked about earlier. Somewhat surprisingly, Marina suggests that everyone she knew from Octarian society may have already been captured and sanitized. Between the mass exodus caused by the calamari incantation, the victims of Kamiboko, and those who turned into mammals, the Octarian army has had a pretty rough few years. This might be why Nintendo called Splatoon 3 the end of the saga. It's possible there just aren't many Octarians left to fight. At this time, Marina actually went back to the deep-sea metro. There, she found all of the memcakes from Kamiboko's test subjects in a massive warehouse. Unfortunately, she had no way to determine which memcakes belonged to which Octarian, and apparently she was under the impression that a single memcake could come from the memories of multiple people. Eventually, she came up with an idea. By converting a memcake into data, she could upload the memory it contained to the Memverse. There, it could be formatted in such a way that it would be compatible with Octoling souls. At some point during her research, Marina determined that difficult repetitive tasks proved effective for memory retention. So, she made a roguelite. The Spire of Order was basically designed as a form of treatment for sanitized Octarians. Something to help them become whole again. A user would enter the Memverse where they would be assigned a palette, representing their soul. Memories would be sifted through their palette, leaving only compatible memories to choose from in the form of color chips. By climbing the spire, completing tasks, and filling out their palette with color chips, a user could reconnect with their lost memories and restore their soul. Of course, we know that didn't go quite as planned, but explaining the entire plot of Side Order is a bit outside the scope of this video. What we need to look at is the stuff going on in the background. In a recent developer interview, art director Seita Inoi confirmed that the cubes we see containing various memorabilia are in fact the extracted memories of the sanitized Octarians. As part of the Memverse's construction, Marina included a facility to produce these blocks of memory, and we can see them being created, transported, and destroyed on a number of floors. Marina explains in her dev diary that the process of sifting through memories requires them to first be mixed together, which might be what's happening on this floor, where we can see them getting ground up and stirred by a massive machine. Unfortunately, while it was in control of the Spire, Order was having these memories incinerated. The snow-like substance we see outside is actually their ashes, drifting down from the top floor. In the end, Order is defeated and the Spire is able to serve its intended purpose. But some memories were lost forever. In Splatoon 2, Sanitization allowed Commander Tartar to execute much of its plan, and justified the existence of the Octarian army 8 faces in the deep-sea metro. But like many aspects of Octo Expansion, there is also a deeper, more personal side to this phenomenon. The developers of Splatoon did not only ask how the brainwashing of masses of soldiers might affect the world at large, but also what it might be like to become one of those people. I am, of course, talking about Acht. Known at first only by their stage name Deadfish, Acht was yet another victim of sanitization. But they were a bit of a special case. Acht's sanitization is something I often see being misunderstood by members of the Splatoon community, so I'd like to make this very clear. To this day, I still see people who believe that Acht was only partially sanitized, retaining more of their original self than the sanitized soldiers we fight in the game. This is not true. From what I can tell, the idea was popularized by a Rassicus video in which they incorrectly translated a quote from that Squid Research Lab Q&A. It was an easy mistake to make, and they would quickly correct themselves on both YouTube and Twitter. Unfortunately, it seems like not everyone got the memo, and I had people commenting on one of my videos years later trying to tell me Deadfish was half sanitized. So I don't know how much reach this video will get in the community, but I would like to do my best to set the record straight. Here is the corrected translation of that quote from the Q&A. Sanitization is to purge life's energies so that they no longer cause unnecessary hesitation and instability in the mind, and to become part of the loyal Kamabo Corporation. It is said that Deadfish wasn't against the idea of being sanitized, and did it so that they could give up their doubts and conflicts about production and devote themselves entirely to music. So originally this was translated as Deadfish wanted to be partially sanitized, when really it means that Deadfish was partially willing to be sanitized. This quote simply means that, unlike most of the Octarians captured by Tartar, there was some part of Deadfish that accepted their assimilation. This fact, while admittedly obscure and unfortunately often misunderstood by the Western audience, is kind of an essential element of Acht's character. Acht, like almost every other sanitized Octarian, was brought up as a trainee in the Octarian army. But Acht didn't want to be a soldier. Even without the influence of the Calamari incantation, Acht saw through the boldness of the Octarian regime. Despite their upbringing in the domes and their explicitly nationalist education, Acht wasn't interested in becoming a loyal cog in the machine. Unfortunately, the domes were no place for a rebellious DJ. Acht's passion for music and disregard for the Octarian cause was frowned upon. They were told that they were doing things wrong, that they should be more diligent and focused. They found themselves hiding away in a club deep underground where the noise of the city and the eyes of the authorities wouldn't reach them. Despite their punk attitude, it seems that Acht did internalize some of what they were told. In the Spire of Order, they refer to themselves as a slacker, often comparing themselves to the high-achieving Marina. While we still don't know much about life in the underground domes, it's probably fair to say that the people living there weren't very happy. But it seems like many Octarians, despite their situation, were able to find a sense of purpose in their work. By dedicating themselves to their schooling, their training, their loyalty to their home, they could consider their lives worth living. Even Marina, a friend of Acht's who seemed to have had some musical background before leaving the domes, put most of her efforts toward doing what was expected of her. She was an exceptional student and engineer who, prior to deserting the army, served directly under DJ Octavio. But Acht wasn't a soldier. They weren't a scholar. They were an artist, and everyone they knew, through words or actions, told them that was wrong. So when confronted with the idea of sanitization, they weren't entirely opposed. Faced with the weight of classmates, colleagues, a nation that did not accept them, throwing away their inhibitions, undergoing an ego death, didn't sound so bad. Making music for no one but themselves, marching to the sound of their own drum machine, was exactly what they wanted. For most people, Kamabo and Sanitization were a trap, but for Acht, it was an escape. Of course, it wasn't what they really needed. We don't know the details of Acht's encounter with Tartar, or if they really knew what they were getting into. When asked about the deep sea metro later on, they remarked that they were forced to produce music there. Acht's life hadn't actually gotten any better. They went from one oppressive regime to another. But they still made that choice. They sought that change. Acht was not a fighter, but they were also not a follower. Personally, I see their decision to become sanitized as a final act of rebellion. Even with their back against the wall, they wouldn't give Tartar what it wanted. By refusing to test at all, Acht denied Tartar their data, their DNA. Paradoxically, when they gave up their will, they proved just how strong it was. This is why the distinction in that translation is so important to me. Acht's choice to become fully sanitized is an extremely important aspect of their story. And it makes their recovery from sanitization that much more impactful. When Marina deserted the army, she effectively abandoned everyone she had ever known, including Acht. They were mostly forgiving after the fact, but they do mention being a little angry, and honestly, I think they're justified in feeling somewhat betrayed. It took the creation of the Memverse for Marina to mend this bond. She saved her old friend from their horrible decision, and from Acht's secret letters, it seems to have worked. They're living on the surface. They're back to making music. They're finally able to be themselves. I've seen a lot of people say they wish Acht played more of an active role in the events of Side Order, and while I don't disagree, I think understanding their story and what it means for all of the other sanitized Octolings should not be overlooked. Acht serves to add depth to the Octarian people and the world of Splatoon as a whole. Like 8, they're a reminder that every Octoling is a person with their own thoughts and feelings, their own path through life. Knowing now the specifics of how sanitization works retroactively adds a layer of tragedy, but also hope to the story of Octo Expansion, and we have Acht to thank for that. To the best of my knowledge, that's everything we know about sanitization. If there's something I missed or got wrong, I will correct myself in the pinned comment down below, because the last thing I want to do is spread misinformation about the lore of this game. To finish, I just want to say that a ton of the information in this video, and a ton of what we know about Splatoon lore in general, comes from fan translations. There's a lot of stuff that exists outside the game in Japanese-only media and interviews, and is left up to members of the community to convey this information to the Western audience. I myself do not know any Japanese, and I have a huge amount of respect and appreciation for everyone and anyone who puts in the work to translate these details. A massive shout out to Rasicus for their work translating those 2018 developer interviews and portions of the Hikara Walker art book. Shout out to Magical Girl Fia for translating the recent Side Order interview, as well as Octo Plus Luna and the rest of the team that faithfully reconstructed the entirety of Hikara Walker in English with proper typefaces and formatting. The dedication these people have to Splatoon lore is amazing, and I wouldn't know half of the stuff I do about the series if not for their efforts. The link to the aforementioned Hikara Walker translation will be in the description, along with all of the translators' social media accounts. I hope this video taught you something new about the world of Splatoon, or at least gave you a new perspective on some of its characters. Before now, I haven't really made a video that just documents information from the game, so let me know if you enjoyed this style and if there are any other aspects of Squid lore you would like me to cover. Until next time, thanks for watching. This has been Cosmic. Farewell.